in Book 2 of Augustine's Confessions, he gets a much clearer picture of what he means by concupiscence. We talked in part 2 of Book 1 about how Augustine has a sacramental worldview, how he saw the nature of sin to be more or less threefold on the individual. That is, it causes a stain for the individual. It causes this concupiscence, we're going to get down to in just a minute. And then that concupiscence also is the reason that we continue to sin, because we're broken. And so all of those are going to need addressed for Augustine. I talked in the last video about how baptism is connected to addressing the first issue. But now Augustine's going to focus a little bit more to what seems to him to be the bigger problem at hand. It's not just that we are guilty things, or that we are withering away things, but even more so, it's the fact that we are really unable to stop ourselves from withering away, right? So again, a lot of scholars will try to, not really scholars, but people that talk about Augustine will sometimes try to say that when he says concupiscence, he just means something like lust. I think that's a way oversimplified view of what Augustine means here. Instead, he means that tendency to that which is evil, seemingly for the sake of its evil itself. Now, we're going to nuance that just a little bit in a moment. But this is where he gives the most famous illustration, probably in the Confessions, which is the story where, as a youth, he goes and steals the pears with his friends simply because he wants to be a thief for the sake of thieving. Right? He recognizes that his friends had an emphasis, or his friends persuaded him in some ways simply by being there, and that he probably wouldn't have done it without their friendship. But he also doesn't think that it's just simply the broader fault of those who are around him. Instead, he sees it as something that is broken within him, that wants evil more or less for evil's sake. But then he pauses for a moment and he reflects upon this. He's like, but does anyone want evil for evil's sake? He says, no, it's not simply because they want what is bad, thinking that it is bad, but for some reason they perceive what is evil as a good. The problem is in their perception of it. And so he talks about the serial killer, in a sense. And he says, it's not that the serial killer simply enjoys that which is bad because it's bad, but he finds something in it that he perceives as a good. And he's seeking that good. And this is a pretty key observation for Augustine. This is actually going to inform what a lot of Christians will continue to talk about as their broader understanding of the will, which we're talking about in Christian doctrines as well. And that is this: the will, having seen what is good, just goes and does the good. And so we talked about how there's maybe a gradation of different wills that exist in us, or different understandings of the good, I should say. And so I might, in one sense, desire to be lazy and to sit at home all day and to eat nothing but junk food. And I might see that as a good, something that I actually like and I want, and that sounds great. But another side of me recognizes that, like, if I do that, the long-term benefits it won't have any long-term benefits, first and foremost. And the long-term benefits that I can receive from working my job or exercising or taking care of my body, stuff like that, those ultimately are a better good. And so even though I maybe want to do the worst option, I can still perceive the option that is not as fun as better, and I will do that which I perceive to be better. For Augustine, this perceiving of the thing as good is extraordinarily important. You will do what you perceive as the better good. Now, you might kind of have some cognitive dissonance where you say, I know that this actually isn't the good for me. But Augustine would say, ultimately, at the end of the day, you don't believe that's the case. You believe that what you're doing is the better good, even if you say that you know better. And the evidence for that is simply in the fact that you do it. If you truly believed that, not eating that bag of chips was the better thing for you, then you wouldn't have done it. Which is, I realize, is a little confusing because I just did two negative terms there. But nonetheless, the point should hold. That's one of the biggest themes of Book 2 of the Confessions. Augustine is recognizing that our tendency to sin is really out of hand. It's beyond control. And notice now how he's kind of systematically addressing, oh, look, in the first book, I recognize my need for God's grace in order to wash me because I am a wasting away person, if you will. I am stained with original sin. In the second book, he's already recognizing, well, it seems that even if I was to deal with the original sin, or if Christ was to deal with the original sin, or something along those lines, I still have this other further problem, which is that my will or my intellect is all out of whack, and that needs to be addressed as well, too. The other thing that's worth noticing, and I'll point this out only briefly, is how often Augustine, in the second book, but also in the first book too, starts connecting some of these transcendentals that we've been talking about in the other class together. He starts talking continuously, sometimes at length for a page or two, about how God is good and he is existing, and his goodness is his nature and his existence is his nature, and he'll wax and he'll wane about this. This is interesting because Augustine is not operating in the exact same framework as the late medievals that we're addressing in this class, like Lombard and especially Aquinas are doing. Augustine is a Christian Neoplatonic, if you will. I think that's at least a fair interpretation of him. Some people have tried to argue that he left his Neoplatonism behind him when he converted Christianity. I don't think he entirely did that. I think he actually became a Christian and pulled some of the Neoplatonic understanding that he had of philosophy in doing so. Now, we'll explore what it means for him to be a Neoplatonist Christian in a little while. It's a bit of a different understanding of reality than the Aristotelian tradition that becomes probably more common during the late medieval ages, such as the 12, 13, 1400s, and the high medieval ages as well. But for now, it's just simply worth recognizing that he's going to take his understanding of theology proper in a slightly different direction, and yet he's still pointing at the interconvertibility of goodness and being. He's still pointing at God's existence being equal to his essence. He's pointing at these fundamental things, and he's certainly going to point at the doctrine of creatio ex nihilo, creation out of nothing. In fact, that becomes a big stumbling block for him for a while. He thinks that Christians don't affirm creation out of nothing because he's giving a rather poor reading of Genesis for a while when he's not a Christian. And he only after he comes to recognize that Christianity does affirm creation out of nothing is he able to submit his intellect to Christ. It's really interesting. So many of those themes will continue playing on throughout the year. I just want you to start seeing that he's doing similar things as we've already been talking about in our other class. Since this is such a short book, I'll only offer one part here. So we'll continue on next week into book 3, and we'll see if that one takes 1 or 2 videos. Until then.